Nadia, the main character, finds herself very fascinated with Dawnrise and what they supposedly stand for, and she even consults Marielle directly on the matter of the heart she has in her possession. Nadia, please, run while you still can, I'm begging you. Hello. How are you? Since November, I've been introducing the cast of my upcoming fantasy webcomic, The Reverent Silence, as part of my epic advertising campaign train. I know I've been talking about this project a lot. I promise I have videos on other topics in my schedule. I'm a sane person, I promise. Today we are moving on to part 3 of the series, so if you haven't watched the first 2 parts already, I highly recommend doing that before coming back here, since those 2 videos introduce the main protagonists. In other words, brace yourselves. We're moving on to the villains. These aren't really your average thumb-twiddling, mustache-twirling villains, well, except for, like, one person. They all have their own motives and their own goals, and some members of Dawnrise Counseling Associates are a lot more morally gray than others, who are just not good people. Just as a refresher, Dawnrise is a kinda sketchy magical counseling self-help group that arrives in the city of Blackfeld, where the story takes place. The Blackfeld Investigation Bureau's first company, aka the protagonists, are alerted to Dawnrise's presence. And as it so happens, the Bureau's head commissioner and the leader of Dawnrise are really not on good terms with each other. It's complicated. Anyway, I've rambled long enough, so grab some popcorn and strap your butts in because here we go! First up is the leader of the bad guys, and honestly, she kinda scares me. Marielle Bélanger is the leader and founder of Dawnrise Counseling Associates, and she is also its main spokesperson. While Dawnrise has seen relatively lucrative success touring around the world, some time before the story, Marielle made the decision to set up a more permanent shop in Blackfeld, hoping to make waves in the City of Wisdom. Born in a snow-covered nation 6 hours north of Blackfeld by train, Marielle is the only child of a comfortably wealthy family with a respectable position in her country's House of Lords, which functions in a way similar to the House of Lords in the UK's Parliament. Despite this, Marielle didn't exactly have a good childhood. Her father was largely absent, and her mother, who was the head of the household, struggled constantly with illness. This left Marielle mostly in the care of one of her aunts. Even though she didn't know what was wrong with her mother, Marielle still wanted desperately to save her, and as a result, her reverence manifested at the age of 8. For reference, the average age for this to happen is 13. Yeah. Unfortunately, Marielle's mother never recovered, and Marielle, who was 12 at the time, was devastated by her mother's death. She grew deeply resentful of everything and everyone around her, often blaming her own powers for being unable to help save her mother. Sometime later, however, she discovered the world of spirituality and metaphysical practices, and initially engaged with it as an outlet for her grief. She would attend seances and visit local seers, and eventually partook in them herself. Her family put in a word to the Reverent Seminary of Rotier, which is basically magical magic school, where she met Safia Batur, who I introduced in the first episode of this series. God help me. The two of them tolerated each other during their school days. Barely. Safia couldn't stand Marielle's boastful and dramatic nature, and Marielle thought Safia was far too serious about everything. A few years after they both graduated with top honors, a particular incident that I can't reveal because of major spoilers drove the two of them apart. Safia would join the Bureau, and Marielle would become a priestess of the Owl being the goddess of wisdom and the patron deity of the nation of Rotier. The other priests didn't like her very much, to put it simply, so in response she went, "You know what? Screw you," and formed Dawnrise Counseling Associates, touring around the world for several years before finally settling in Blackfeld. Marielle is, yeah, she's awful. She's very intelligent, very cunning, and very perceptive of her surroundings, and she uses both of those to her advantage whenever she can. Even in her youth, she had a fair bit of hubris. To the general public, however, Marielle presents herself as a warm-hearted and compassionate woman willing to lend an ear to those who may need it, and she uses her charm and charisma to sway people and potential customers to her side. She's never above resorting to some underhanded methods to get her way, and always searches for an opportunity to get at least one snide remark in, regardless of the situation. She has a very twisted view of the world and a general disdain for most of society. If you're wondering why such a foul, terrible person is running a magic self-help group, let's just say it's pretty much for her own gain. Is she a sociopath? Yeah. Yeah, probably. She's kinda unhinged, this one. Marielle actually has two abilities. One is her reverence, and the other is a divine gift that exists completely independent of her reverence. But I'm going to talk about her reverence first. Where Sophia can transform non-organic matter like metal, Marielle can basically do the opposite. She can change all organic matter on a molecular level. So basically, if Sophia can't change it, chances are Marielle can. Take trees, dirt, and living tissue, for example. However, aside from the drawback of being unable to change non-organic matter, Marielle cannot change complex organisms like animals or humans. At least not completely. This is primarily because humans and animals are made of different organic structures, and while Marielle could change one organ at a time without breaking a sweat, she can't change someone's entire composition in one go without it causing major problems, both for Marielle and the person on the receiving end of her power. So shape-shifting is out of the picture. Her other power manifested a little later in life when she was working as a priestess. In the world of the Reverent Silence, there are 15 gods, each with their own emissaries who run the nation of their patronage. Emissaries can be chosen from a pool of acolytes who are personally blessed by the gods at birth, and these acolytes have special abilities that they carry regardless of whether or not they can use reverence. Though the probability of reverent acolytes is higher than mundane acolytes. Marielle's ability as an acolyte allows her to get a basic reading of people's energies, though not on the same level as someone who can sense or see other people's auras. Marielle can also communicate with the gods with the exception of the Raven, who is the god of death and rebirth, but she has no idea why this is the case. Marielle was the first villain to be created for the story, and the rest of the villains mostly fell into place. All of the villains are relatively new characters with the exception of Talia, Marielle's second-in-command, who was created long before the Reverent Silence was ever thought up. For the most part, I had a clear idea of Marielle's design from the start, and only made a few minor changes in the 2 years between then and now. I had the idea of an elegant, sharply dressed individual in mind, very professional looking, and someone who would just fit the picture as the leader of a magic counseling group, with totally not sketchy intentions. Every main character in the Reverent Silence has their own signature color, and Marielle's is orange, which is also the color of her aura. A fair share of the cast had their designs influenced by certain animals or mythological beings, and in Marielle's case, her design took some inspiration from the little owl. Being that the owl can be perceived as a symbol of wisdom, and being that Marielle likes to style herself as someone who is very knowledgeable about the world and other things as well, it only seemed like the right choice. Considering they were rivals, Sophia is not happy to see Marielle back in Blackfeld. But the head commissioner still sees an opportunity to keep tabs on her former colleague just to see what she's up to and if the facade will crack. With the help of the First Company, of course. Nadia, the main character, finds herself very fascinated with Dawnrise and what they supposedly stand for, and she even consults Marielle directly on the matter of the heart she has in her possession. Nadia, please, run while you still can, I'm begging you. As with many of the main characters in the Reverent Silence, Marielle gets put through the ringer quite a bit. She is directly tied to the lore and the main storyline and the main plot twists in the story, not just because she's a villain. She is heavily involved in the previous chain of events that happened for things in the present to play out the way they are. So it's going to be very fun to make her face the consequences of her actions, if you will. Anyway, that's all I have to say about Marielle, so let's move on to her second-in-command. Okay, so we're moving on from the leader of Dawnrise herself to the woman who is basically Marielle's yes-man. If you're familiar with Genshin Impact and have played past the Inazuma Archon quests, you could theoretically call this woman the Kujo-Sara to Marielle's Raiden Shogun. Talia Steele is the counselor of Dawnrise Counseling Associates, handling more private business matters in Marielle's stead if necessary, and advising Marielle on major financial and networking decisions. She is part of the reason why Dawnrise ultimately settled in Blackfeld, as it is the capital of the nation of Rotier, and a vast hub of commerce, the sharing of knowledge, and all sorts of other things. Talia is the youngest child of a very wealthy entrepreneur, her older sister being the heiress of her father's company. Both sisters grew up shadowing their parents during negotiations, transactions, and other deals relating to the company, and were raised to approach all of their business affairs in a way that would get them the necessary results. Whether that was appealing to a side of the other party or taking things on in a ruthless manner when necessary, all that mattered was them winning. Even though Talia was the spared child, she was still treated just the same as her sister was. Neither sister was prioritized over the other, and neither of them wanted for anything. However, because she was the spared child, Talia was given more free rein to do whatever she pleased, as long as at the end of the day she had a career that would make good use of the skills she learned. Several years before the events of the Reverent Silence, Talia saw that a certain business called Dawnrise Counseling Associates was hiring, and in need of a new counselor. So, on an otherwise normal day in the middle of spring, Talia met Marielle in her temporary office, a deal was struck, and the rest is history. Talia is a very serious, very formal, and very blunt woman. She gets straight to the point with everything she says, she'll deliver all of the facts to you in a less than savory way sometimes, but that's just how she rolls, unfortunately. Despite her unwavering loyalty to Marielle and their shared ruthlessness in how they approach their business, their personalities outside of that are practically night and day. Marielle comes off as this jovial, flamboyant, and very in-your-face woman, while Talia is more reserved and far less cheerful than Marielle is. Come to think of it, Talia is probably the most serious person in the Dawnrise Committee, and she barely puts up with her coworkers' antics. Despite her cold, calculating, and rigid nature, however, Talia appreciates some of the finer things in life, and you may sometimes find her at the opera or indulging in some afternoon tea. Talia's reverence allows her to manipulate the intensity of the sounds around her, whether that's subtle ambient noise or louder sounds that are actively occurring within the immediate vicinity. Think the ability to turn the clicking of a keyboard into the sound of an airplane engine 10 feet away from you, or playing with the volume settings on your TV remote or something like that. Talia can increase the intensity of a noise or diminish it, whether it's from a source around her or created by her directly, as long as the source of that noise is within a certain radius. She cannot, however, change the pitch of the sounds occurring around her, but she can certainly do a lot of damage with the power she has, and she could probably level a building with her reverence if she wanted to. If we're talking in real-world terms, Talia is probably the oldest character I have that went into the Reverent Silence. I created her in 2013, and she's older than Pieter, my second oldest character in the story, by a few months. Although in universe, she's 4 years older than he is. Talia was originally created for a sci-fi fantasy story called The Journey of Saya, about a girl who had to stop dark forces from taking over the world. Talia was a good friend of the main character Saya, and her personality was the complete opposite of what it is now. She was energetic, cheerful, and the mood maker of the main group. But like many of my childhood projects, The Journey of Saya was eventually abandoned. So, fast forward to 2021 when I was brainstorming the group of villains for the amorphous blob of ideas that would eventually become the Reverent Silence. Talia's earlier design in her current iteration was a lot more different than her final design, and that's not even getting into the 2013 design. And I think she underwent some of the biggest design changes of the entire main cast. She had this more feminine look to her design, and her hair was shorter, with cat ears going where a pair of human ears would go. Of course, all of those things changed, but her signature color stayed the same. Talia originally had the traits of a calico cat and didn't have a tail, but I later gave her the traits of a European wildcat instead. Briefly touching on the ears bit, I will confess I haven't quite worked out the logistics of some people in the world of the Reverent Silence having 2 pairs of ears, but I really want both pairs to be functional somehow. So maybe it could be an evolutionary trait where those with 2 pairs of ears have a heightened sense of hearing, but not to the point where they're constantly overstimulated. Hopefully I'm making sense. Also, during the creative process for Talia, I constantly debated whether I should give her a sword, since there's another character, Nadia, who technically has one already. But I realized that there could be a lot of fun opportunities in case these two ever had to cross swords. Battle of the Swordswomen or Sword Bowl or something like that. Talia's ruthlessness and methodical approach to her work will absolutely be on full display as the story progresses. As I said earlier, she's not focused on anything other than whether the task she set up for herself will be accomplished or not, and she'll only do something if she knows it will benefit Dawnrise and its reputation. Dawnrise's entire committee is, at a minimum, morally gray. They don't all fawn over Marielle, of course, but they all have their reasons for being part of such a questionable business. It's been fun writing Talia's interactions and relationships with the rest of the Dawnrise committee. They're a very interesting bunch. You think they'd be closer than siblings, but these folks bicker quite a bit. However, there is a bit later on in the story where Talia's moral compass and her loyalty to Marielle is called into question. No spoilers, of course, but hopefully that'll give you something very spicy hot to stew on. But nevertheless, that is going to do it for this video. If you like this video and you want to see more art-related videos and shenanigans from me, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I post new videos every other Monday, usually about drawing or character designs or what have you, but sometimes I dabble in other art-related things as well. If you want to support me further, please check out my other social media accounts as well as my Ko-fi and my Etsy shop, which are all in the description. And lastly, if you made it this far, leave an owl emoji in the comments section below. And yeah, that's about everything. Thanks for watching.